nutrition expert. Today I'm going to be covering some benefits and some hidden dangers of the carnivore diet. No doubt you've heard of that diet before. And we're going to listen in to Joe Rogan interviewing Jordan Peterson about his and his daughter's experience with the carnivore diet. I'm going to provide some commentary because it's kind of needed. And I'm going to finish out the video with some really great lab values to get checked. And that way, if you are following the carnivore diet or something that's similarly restrictive, we can make sure we're taking care of your long-term health. All right, let's get to it.
Well, all of the motivation for this has been my experience with my daughter because she has an unbelievably serious autoimmune disease.
What is it called?
Well, it's arthritis, but there's way more to it than that. But the arthritis was the major set of symptoms. She had 40 affected joints.
If you are diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder and you are having difficulty controlling your symptoms or just feeling well, oftentimes you can follow an elimination diet that's not as restrictive as the carnivore diet and get to baseline health or improve such a dramatic improvement in symptoms, and then you strategically and intentionally add foods back in one at a time so that you can identify, oh, okay, well, I ate those strawberries 3 days ago and now I am having all these symptoms. That would be the only new food that you would reintroduce. And so this really helps you isolate your specific offending foods.
I eat beef and salt and water. That's it.
Ooh, that's all he eats. Fiber is one of those nutrients. Yes, it is a nutrient that the body uses, and it is so important for a variety of health conditions. Let's talk about poop. So constipation is the #1 gastrointestinal condition worldwide. It affects about 20% of the population. This is one of the things in your diet that can worsen constipation if you drop fiber intake very low. Also, fiber is a nutrient that helps to bind to fat and it gets excreted through poop. So if you have high and elevated cholesterol levels and you have a high risk of cardiovascular disease, absolutely you want to include fiber in your diet long term. Now, maybe temporarily as you do an elimination diet to figure out what foods are specific triggers for you, there are ways to assist your colon to get the poop out, but for long-term health sake, definitely you want to include fiber. Here's another really interesting statistic is that in countries that have the highest fiber intake, it's usually the non-industrialized countries where they're eating lots of unprocessed whole foods. They have the lowest risk of diagnoses like diverticulosis and diverticulitis. That's common in the United States. We have drastically lower fiber intake, 12 to 15 grams, far, far below these other countries with incredible colon health. Fiber also helps to speed your stool through your colon and get it out of there. And the longer it sits in the colon, the more the body reabsorbs the toxic material. And that's why there is an increased risk for colon cancer when you have low intake of plants and fiber material. And probably the last benefit of fiber, there are so many, but the last one I'm going to mention is that fiber feeds your gut bacteria. And when you drastically change your diet, you make big shifts in your microbiota. And for some people that have a very poor balance of microorganisms in their colon, this can be a really powerful shift in the bacteria that is in their colon. Like if you have a higher percentage of pathogenic bacteria, and that is one of the things that's influencing your chronic diseases or your chronic symptoms, then almost doing like a reset of that bacteria, essentially what you're doing is you're starving them because they don't have much fuel to feed off of, then that can be a benefit to you. But for those who have actually healthy gut flora, but maybe have symptoms in other parts of their bodies for other reasons, eliminating fiber can have the opposite impact. Now you are allowing your healthy bacteria that you have grown and nourished for, however long that you've been really focusing on plant material and fiber, now you're compromising the health of those types of beneficial strains of bacteria. But what's so interesting is that the heaviest breadth of knowledge that we have about diet related to longevity, it really appears that those who eat more plants, not saying that you don't eat meat, but those who eat plants as a high majority of their diet, they live longer. We gotta have our fiber.
When she developed arthritis, if she ate oranges in particular, that would definitely cause a flare. It was the only thing we could see. The problem is that in order to identify a dietary component, the response has to be pretty quick after you eat the thing. Like if it's 2 days later, how the hell are you going to figure that out? Right. A lot of these responses appear to be delayed for 4 days and last a month.
I think that that's in the category of people like him and his daughter that have this HLA-DR gene mutation where they just have this very exaggerated chronic inflammation. But it could apply to other people who maybe are have positive ANAs or have just very high CRP levels, while they had to really do something quite extreme and stay on it, as you'll hear, to experience and maintain improvements in their symptoms. That doesn't necessarily apply to all people listening.
Around exam time, she was starting to develop real skin problems. Wait a second, I really changed my diet. When I'm studying, all I do is eat bagels, all I do is eat bread, sandwiches. And she thought, maybe it's the bread. So she cut out gluten for.
As far as elimination goes, oftentimes if you are experiencing really elevated inflammation or chronic symptoms, that would be a really great first elimination, and that might be enough for you, and you might experience such an incredible improvement in your symptoms that becomes the treatment for you, and that's sustainable because it's not all the way to the end of the spectrum of carnivore, and so that's something that you could maintain. And listen to this, the longer you exclude foods from your diet, the more difficult it is for your body to manage or process, digest, and absorb those foods. So let me give you an example. When you exclude dairy for a really long time, your body decreases lactase. That is the digestive enzyme that you are required to have in order to digest lactose, the milk sugar that's in the dairy products that you might be eating. So let's say that you've avoided dairy, and all of a sudden you are going to reincorporate dairy back into your diet, and you have excluded dairy for 2 years. Your body is not likely going to make enough lactase in order to digest that lactose well and for you to not have symptoms. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you are still reactive to that dairy product or the milk sugar. It is just possibly you need some enzyme support as your body gets reacquainted to this food and how to digest it. So digestive enzymes is something that I often recommend to my clients when they are reincorporating foods back in after a period of elimination, because we want to identify, what are you actually having a reaction, or is there some other mechanism or some other reason why you don't feel well when you eat this new food again?
Already gone for a whole year on a sugar-free diet. I didn't lose any weight.
If your goal is weight loss and you drop sugar, that is one potential way of creating a calorie deficit. But you can also substitute those calories from sugar with plenty of other foods. And so for some people, if you don't make that substitution, all of a sudden you're going to have a drop in calories and you will see weight loss. But for other people, like what may have happened in his case, he just swapped those calories for XYZ foods, and so it didn't make that difference for him.
Then I lost 7 pounds the next month. Then I lost 7 pounds the next month. I lost 7 pounds every month for 7 months.
Okay, so here is something so cool about kind of why he's explaining what he's explaining about weight loss. is that there are different modifiable factors in your diet that can influence whether you lose weight, maintain weight, or gain weight. This is an example right here. So you can modify what you eat, which is clearly what he has done. He is only eating meat. You can modify when you eat, what times of the day, how close to bedtime. The carnivore diet also affects how much you eat. Certainly, you're not eating certain food groups, so that's very little to none. And he's eating much more meat, which meat's primary component, macronutrient, is protein. Now, certainly there are fatty cuts, but protein is so satiating that oftentimes when that's your only food source, it is so satiating. All of a sudden now you're eating much lower calories because you are so full from that meat that you are eating. And then we can also modify the why you eat. And that's addressing, like, are you eating because you're lonely? Are you eating because you're sad? Are you eating because you're stressed out? Are you eating because it's that time of day where you always grab a snack? So these are the components, especially the why you eat, that doing a carnivore diet or an elimination diet, or frankly any other diet out there, doesn't often address the underlying behaviors, the underlying reasons for why you're reaching for something. So while you may see progress doing an elimination diet or a carnivore diet, and you may lose weight, the challenge is honestly not losing the weight. It's maintaining the weight loss.
Here's the coolest thing. I've had gum disease since I was 25. That's been serious enough I've had to have minor surgical interventions, scraping and that sort of thing to keep it at bay. It's gone. I checked with my dentist before this last tour. No inflammation. And that's associated with heart disease, by the way, gum inflammation and gingivitis.
Absolutely it is, because of how far back they are, how much inflammation can be around the wisdom teeth, and risk for heart disease, heart attacks. Isn't that crazy? If you are an adult approaching midlife and you still have your wisdom teeth, get those suckers out.
You've done no blood work, so you don't know what your lipid profile is, or...
No, I'll get that.
I love this question from Joe. Thank you for asking it. He's like, it's just such a polite, sort of loving question. So you haven't had any blood work done? Yes. It's so important to have baseline lab work. When you do an intervention, some kind of big change to your life, I want to get some baseline labs, especially inflammatory markers like CRP, homocysteine, comprehensive like lipid panel is, including apolipoprotein B, because that's another hidden danger of the carnivore diet, is that your saturated fat intake is likely going to go up really high. And there are people, I'm one of them, who is considered a hyper responder. So with very high saturated fat intake, your cholesterol levels shoot through the roof, and that's reflected in apolipoprotein B, which is a causative risk factor for heart disease. You have to know that about yourself so you can make sure that you're taking care of yourself long term, not just in the moment, not just in the short term of like, hey, my symptoms are improving, I'm going to do this rest of my life. I mean, heart disease is still the #1 killer worldwide. So it is something that we want to pay attention to.
I have had many, many people come up to me on the tour
Sure.
and say, look, I've been following your daughter's blog and I've lost like 100 pounds. I think, what? You lost 100 pounds? Yeah, I lost 100 pounds in 6 months. I talked to a woman yesterday. She lost 15 pounds in 1 month. She was 70.
It's not surprising to me that if you follow a very restrictive diet, you're going to lose weight. I mean, that makes sense. But can you maintain that? That's a hidden danger of following a carnivore diet, is you are sort of teased with, oh my gosh, I lost 7 pounds as mother. Oh my gosh, I lost, 100 pounds in 6 months. Can you maintain that? Do you know what to do to maintain that? I mean, that's a question you really want to ask yourself. Are you planning to eat carnivore the rest of your life? And maybe you are, because you have such incredible improvements in your health and your symptoms and your diagnoses, or all those things. And if that's the case, the longer you are following an extreme diet, the more at risk you are for vitamin deficiencies, just really the side effects of just eating so restrictively.
What's wrong is that we're eating way too many carbohydrates, I think.
Okay, so carbohydrates are fuel for activity. So, in a population that is more sedentary than we've ever been before, I even saw a scientist liken sitting as the new smoking. That's how much correlation there is with an increase in chronic disease, is how much you sit in your day. If you are more sedentary, your body does not require as much carbohydrate, because carbohydrate is the primary fuel source for activity, especially higher intensity activity. So in that context, yeah, we probably are eating way too many carbohydrates. They rapidly raise blood sugar if they are low in fiber, highly processed, and especially if combined with a low protein intake and low fiber intake. So that's because diabetes is on the list of reasons for mortality across the world. We do want to be careful about carbohydrates. Another way to think about diabetes is carbohydrate intolerance.
So if I go to dinner, I'll have a little pasta, and it doesn't seem to mess me up too bad, but I do feel shitty after I do it. It's like for simple mouth pleasure, I'm allowing myself to feel tired.
Okay, so there are a lot of reasons why he might feel bad. I know he's very active, so it could be he just needs to eat less volume of those carbohydrates and he would feel fantastic. It could be that he does have some type of gluten intolerance or gluten sensitivity, and when he eats that in large quantities, he does sort of have this reaction and he feels fatigue and tired. If it's blood sugar related and you have high carbohydrate intake, one of the things you can do is go for a quick walk after you eat, let's say a bowl of pasta. Go for a 10-15 minute walk. That helps to lower your blood sugars. It helps the muscles, tissues soak up the sugar that's running through your bloodstream from that higher than normal carbohydrate meal. And it doesn't actually require insulin from your pancreas to pull that glucose into your muscle tissue. So that's one of the best things I can recommend if you're trying to identify, is this a reaction to the food, or is this my blood sugar has kind of swung up and then it's sort of crashing? So go for a walk. If you feel much better after that walk and you kind of get back to your baseline, then it's probably blood sugar related and not like a reaction to the food or to food ingredients or components.
We shouldn't be eating massive quantities of corn syrup. We eat way too many carbohydrates.
And, along those lines, the food industry, which is, ultra-processed food is so readily available now. Most of the macronutrients on packaged and processed foods are carbohydrates. It's not going to be protein, and, sometimes it is fat, but you've got to make sure you're getting adequate protein intake, and you'll find that as you start looking at nutrition labels, you have to be very intentional to get enough protein if you're depending on packaged and processed foods. Now, of course, you can find bottled protein shakes and protein bars, but outside of those two, most of the packaged processed foods are going to be rich in carbohydrates.
Yeah, it's very curious to me because you're talking about one adverse reaction, which is when you deviated from the diet.
Yeah.
What I'm talking about is when I read people's accounts of trying this diet, it's almost universally positive.
Yeah, I know.
If you are in the position of Jordan Peterson or Michaela Peterson, in their position, when you have such extreme health conditions and symptoms, the benefits of the carnivore diet and your symptom improvement probably outweighs the risks that you run by following it.
Lots of people have come up to me and said, look, I lost 45 pounds in the last 3 months. Well, I couldn't believe it.
You could have the same thing from someone who said, I started tracking my calories and I lost 45 pounds. It happens all the time. So that's not, I think what people are surprised about is I sort of lost weight by accident. Someone who's tracking calories, they're engaging in behaviors that intentionally are moving themselves towards weight loss, moving themselves towards a lower weight goal that they have. And I think that's why this sounds surprising or shocking, is because these people are following this diet and then weight loss appears to be a side effect of that. And it all goes back to this screen here. When you're following the carnivore diet or any type of restrictive diet, oftentimes you're modifying multiple categories in this, and that's often why people start to see weight loss and they're just sort of their weight and body fat drop off. And that is very exciting. Weight loss, losing the actual initial weight, is not the hardest thing. It's maintaining so that you're not doing this yo-yo diet, because every time you lose weight, you are losing a mix of fat and muscle tissue. And when you regain weight, most often, unless you are eating purposely and intentionally in a calorie surplus with high protein intake and lots of strength training, the majority of what you are regaining, if not all, is body fat. So you do that cycle a few times over your lifetime, or often in your lifetime, and you end up having a higher percentage of body fat than muscle tissue as time goes on. So that's something to be so careful about if your goal is weight loss.
And that's another thing I should say to people. If you want to try a diet like this, you eat enough meat and fat so you're not hungry. Okay, you can't get hungry. You're not eating enough if you're hungry. And if you're hungry, you're going to cheat, and it's going to drive you stark raving mad.
You're not hungry because you're eating so much protein and fat, but it's so satiating, and you're not experiencing highs and lows of blood sugar. So yeah, that's definitely a benefit of eating large amounts of protein.
Like, I kind of lived on peanut butter sandwiches and chocolate milk. Not really, but that was my go-to food, you know, both of which were terrible for me.
So think about the contrast in how he's eating now. Or before he switched over, he was eating peanut butter jelly sandwiches and chocolate milk, very, very high carbohydrate foods, and contains gluten.
Could be incredulous. Like, when people make absurd claims, it's like, oh, well, I had 50 health problems and I stopped eating everything but meat and they went away. It's like,
okay, so here's a personal story. So my oldest child has several digestive diseases, and he has struggled with a lot of symptoms over the years. And one of the things that we will do with him is, if he starts to have a flare up, you know what we do? We basically put him on an elimination diet, a modified carnivore diet, which was meat, a couple of fruits, a couple of vegetables. He bounces back so fast within a couple of days. Now, he's a teenager. This isn't always easy to do, right? He can make his own choices as a teenager. And before we figured this out about him, we were talking years ago, I kid you not, he's in high school now, but during his 6th grade year, he was out of school almost the entire 6th grade year. He lost weight. We could not figure out how to help his body control his inflammatory responses. Now we know. We got to, get him off processed and packaged foods. We have to make sure that he's not eating his specific trigger foods. 2 things that he reacts to pretty heavily: corn and oats. You would think, some people are like, oh, oats, they're so great. But this kind of goes back to that individual biology. Is you've got to figure out what works for you, and doing an elimination diet can help you identify that.
As a person who's studied diet for many years, I would assume that you need phytonutrients. I would assume you need vitamin supplements.
like vitamin C, for example.
Yes.
Turns out if you don't eat carbohydrates, you don't need vitamin C. Who would have guessed that?
How's that work?
Okay. Vitamin C does compete for absorption with glucose, because there is a transport on cell membranes that is called GLUT, the GLUT transport. And yes, that is where glucose gets transported into the cell. That is also where vitamin C gets transported into the cell. But guess what? That's not the only transport in the body. So you have also a transporter that is called SVCT 1 and 2. And you know what? Those transports are on brain cells. So just because you do not have carbohydrates in your diet does not mean that your brain and the rest of your body doesn't need and want vitamin C. That is considered an essential nutrient. Your body cannot make it. It is required for collagen production. It is required for immune function. Super important to think about that.
And I'd like to find out what your nutrient levels are and where they're coming from. I mean, what how
Yeah,
much
I'm getting a
nutrients are
little,
you getting?
I'm getting a little cramping in my toes from time to time, so I'm not sure about
Potassium,
or
perhaps.
yeah, or
Potassium, magnesium. Some hidden dangers of the carnivore diet also include other types of deficiencies. Vitamin A, that actually can be prevented by eating organ meats, especially liver. But he says he doesn't really even eat organ meats, so that would be one thing to add into your diet if you are eating carnivore, to make sure that you're getting those types of vitamins. You may experience deformed blood cells when you do lab work, which would show anemia. You might experience hair loss. So easy to supplement. If you know what you're deficient in, because you've done your lab work, you can fill in those gaps. So don't just assume that the carnivore diet is going to provide everything you need and that it's the perfect solution to everything because you feel better and your symptoms are improving. The longer you are on this restrictive approach, the more at risk you are for these longer term effects. I mean, it can take, if you are vitamin C deficient, 2 to 3 months before you deal with the consequences of a deficiency. And if you are convinced that the carnivore diet is beneficial for you for all the different reasons that we talked about, get those micronutrient levels checked. And that way you can really protect yourself long term if you continue to do this type of diet.
How difficult is it when you're trying to get breakfast? Like, what do you do when you...
Well, lots of times when we're traveling, we cook. So we usually stay in places where you can cook.
Oh, okay.
But most places you can get a steak.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's mostly what we do. We've been traveling in a motorhome, and so we've been cooking in the motorhome.
In order to sustain it and maintain it, you will need to structure your life around it. And if you're doing it for weight loss, well, really, if you're doing anything for weight loss, it's the same principle. You then structure your life around what is working for you and not go with the flow, because like we talked about, going with the flow in America is usually going to lead you to being fat, sick, and overweight, obese, chronic health conditions, dying early.
It might be that for some people a vegan diet or vegan diet is preferable. Well, certainly to a standard American diet.
Well, for sure, to a standard American diet. But also there's so much biological variability.
Yeah.
You know, the things that bother some people don't bother other people at all. And that's something that we got to take into consideration.
Regardless of what diet you choose, you want to be intentional with what you're doing. If you're doing carnivore and you want to avoid deficiencies, you want to be intentional and think through all of the pros and cons. Those hidden dangers that we've talked about. If you do a vegan diet or a vegetarian diet, okay, what are the downsides of that? Every diet has downsides, has upsides and downsides. Some are more exaggerated than others, but you want to think through all that so that you are being intentional and really taking care of your health in the best way you can.
With Michaela, it's miraculous. I cannot believe it. The last time I saw her, it made me cry. I've never seen her look like that. She looks so good. Wow. She's so healthy and so
all of her other joints are not experiencing any problems.
And she's taking no immunomodulators at all. No medication. None.
And she was on them forever.
Oh, Jesus, yes.
If you can find the thing to follow that relieves symptoms in such an incredible way that he is talking about, how can anyone argue against that? There you have it. Carnivore diet. Pros and cons. Some hidden dangers to really think carefully about, to prepare yourself, to be intentional about what you're doing to take care of your long-term health. 2 labs you want to get checked. Get a serum ascorbic acid level checked after you have done the carnivore diet for at least a month, and then get that regularly checked, because that's an indication of what your vitamin C levels are. It's so easy to correct that, especially, for us women. We want to make sure we have enough collagen, and, we all want to make sure our immune system is working. And then the second one is your apolipoprotein B level. Definitely great to have this at baseline. And then after you have done the carnivore diet for a couple of months or longer, get your ApoB level rechecked. And that way you can know, is this benefiting your symptoms that you are experiencing and also improving your cardiovascular health? Or is that something that you need to be considering as a downside for you based on your individual biology? All right, there you have it. See you next time. Bye.